The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when Willa Preston realized she was going to die alone on the Oklahoma frontier. 23 years old with frostbitten fingers and a heart full of regrets she would never get to remedy. She had stopped feeling her toes sometime during the second night, huddled in what remained of the covered wagon that had been her only shelter since the axle broke 2 miles outside of Enid. Her father and brother had gone ahead on the horses to fetch help, promising to return before nightfall. That had been 4 days ago. The blizzard had swept in with a vengeance that first evening, transforming the prairie into a white hell that swallowed all landmarks and erased any hope of finding one's way. She had screamed herself hoarse calling for them that first night, but the wind had stolen her voice and given nothing back but the howling emptiness of winter's fury. The wagon's canvas top had torn away on the second day, leaving her exposed to the elements with only the wooden sides for protection. She had burned what little furniture they had carried, piece by precious piece, trying to keep the cold at bay. Her mother's rocking chair, the small table her brother had made, even the family Bible had gone into the flames when desperation overtook reverence. Now there was nothing left to burn, and the cold had settled into her bones with the permanence of death itself. Willa's thoughts drifted as consciousness became an increasingly difficult thing to maintain. She thought of her mother, buried 3 years past in Missouri after the fever took her. She thought of the life they had been traveling toward, the promise of land and opportunity that had lured them westward like so many others. She thought of Thomas Miller, the boy back home who had asked for her hand before they left, and how she had refused him because she wanted adventure, wanted to see what lay beyond the familiar boundaries of her childhood. Now she would see nothing but the inside of a pine box, if they even found her body before the wolves did. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her fading awareness like a knife through butter. At first, she thought it was delirium, another cruel trick of a mind slipping toward the final darkness. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a voice calling out through the storm. She tried to respond, but her lips would not move properly, her voice emerging as nothing more than a whisper that could not compete with the wind. Then a shadow fell across her, and she looked up through snow-crusted eyelashes to see a figure on horseback, broad-shouldered and solid against the white chaos of the blizzard. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, landing in the snow with a crunch that seemed impossibly loud in her muffled world. "I've come to take you home," he said, and his voice was rough like gravel but warm like summer honey, and Willa felt something stir in her chest that she thought had frozen solid hours ago. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the last desperate grasp of a dying woman at any lifeline offered. He knelt beside her, and she could see him more clearly now, despite the snow that clung to everything. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that stuck out from beneath a snow-covered hat and eyes that were the color of strong coffee. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, but there was a gentleness in his expression that contradicted the harsh lines the elements had carved into his features. "Can you hear me?" he asked, and Willa managed a slight nod. "Good. That's good. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay with me, understand? Don't you dare give up now." He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, and the warmth that clung to the fabric from his body heat was like stepping into heaven. She wanted to protest, to tell him he would freeze without it, but he was already moving, lifting her from the wagon bed with surprising ease. She weighed next to nothing after days without food, and he held her against his chest like she was something precious and fragile. "My horse can carry us both," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's not far to my place, just a couple miles due east. We can make it." He secured her on the saddle first, then mounted behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady. His other hand held the reins, and he urged the horse forward into the blinding snow. Willa could feel the solid warmth of him at her back, could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the layers of clothing between them. She let her head fall back against his shoulder, too weak to hold it up any longer, and felt his arm tighten around her. "Stay awake," he commanded, his voice close to her ear. "Talk to me. Tell me your name." "Willa," she managed, the words scraping past her throat like broken glass. "Willa Preston." "I'm Finn, Garrett," he replied. "I have a ranch about 2 miles from here. Been checking my fences when I saw your wagon. How long have you been out here?" "For days," she whispered. "My father and brother went for help. They never came back." She felt him go tense behind her. 4 days in this storm. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It's a miracle you're still breathing." "Am I?" she asked, and she genuinely was not certain. Perhaps she had already died, and this was some strange dream her mind had conjured in those final moments. "You are," he said firmly. "And you're going to stay that way if I have anything to say about it. Keep talking to me, Willa Preston." "Where were you headed?" "Enid," she said. "We have a land claim there, had a land claim. I don't know if my father and brother are alive." "The storm came up fast," Finn said. "They might have holed up somewhere, waiting it out. Once we get you safe and this weather clears, we'll find them." Willa wanted to believe him, but hope seemed like a luxury she could not afford. She had already accepted death once. Believing in survival felt like tempting fate to snatch it away again. But the warmth of his body and the solid strength of his arm around her were undeniable realities, and slowly, incrementally, she began to think that perhaps she might actually live through this. The ride seemed to take forever, and no time at all. Willa drifted in and out of awareness, and each time she started to slip too far, Finn would jostle her gently and speak her name, pulling her back from the edge. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had been ranching in Oklahoma Territory for 3 years, that he had come west from Texas after his parents died. She learned that his voice had a slight drawl that became more pronounced when he was worried, and that he was very worried about her indeed. Finally, blessedly, a structure emerged from the white chaos. It was a house, small but solid, built of wood with a covered porch that provided a windbreak from the storm. Beside it stood a barn, and Finn steered the horse toward it first. "I need to get the horse inside," he explained. "He's earned his keep today and then some. Can you hold on for just a few more minutes?" Willa nodded against his shoulder. She had held on this long. She could manage a few minutes more. Finn dismounted and lifted her down, carrying her into the barn and setting her on a pile of hay that was mercifully dry and out of the wind. Then he tended to his horse with swift efficiency, removing the saddle and bridle, rubbing the animal down with handfuls of straw, making sure there was feed and water available. The horse nickered softly, and Finn patted its neck with genuine affection. "Good boy," he murmured. "You did good today, Buck. Real good." Then he was back at Willa's side, scooping her up again and carrying her out of the barn and across the short distance to the house. The wind fought him every step, but he bent his head and pushed forward, his boots crunching through snow that was now halfway up his calves. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, shouldering it closed behind them to shut out the howling storm. The interior of the house was dim and cold, but it was shelter, and after 4 days in the open, it felt like a palace to Willa. Finn carried her directly to the fireplace and set her in a chair before it, then set about building a fire with the kind of practiced speed that spoke of long experience. Within minutes, flames were crackling and beginning to throw heat into the room. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," Finn said, and there was nothing improper in his tone, just the practical concern of someone who understood the dangers of hypothermia. "I'm going to get you one of my shirts and some blankets. Don't try to move on your own, you're likely to fall and hurt yourself." He disappeared into another room and returned with an armful of fabric. His shirt was far too large for her, but it was dry and clean, and that was all that mattered. He turned his back to give her privacy, standing between her and the rest of the room like a human shield, while she struggled out of her frozen dress with numb, clumsy fingers. It took far longer than it should have, and more than once she had to bite back a cry of pain as feeling began to return to her extremities in sharp, stabbing increments. "Are you decent?" Finn asked after what felt like an eternity. "Yes," Willa managed, and he turned back around, his expression carefully neutral. He wrapped her in blankets, tucking them around her like she was a child being put to bed, then disappeared again and returned with a cup of something hot that steamed in the cold air of the house. "Broth," he explained. "You need to warm up from the inside out. Drink it slowly. Your stomach won't thank you if you gulp it down." Willa took the cup with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The broth was simple, just beef and salt and heat, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She sipped it slowly as instructed, feeling warmth spread through her chest and down into her belly. Finn watched her carefully, and she saw some of the tension leave his shoulders when she finished half the cup without getting sick. "I need to check your hands and feet," he said. "Frostbite can be serious if it's not treated properly." He knelt in front of her and unwrapped her feet from the blankets, his touch gentle despite the size of his hands. Willa's feet were pale and mottled, and when he pressed carefully on her toes, the pain was intense enough to make her gasp. But there were no black patches, no signs of the deep tissue damage that would mean amputation. "It's not as bad as it could be," Finn said. "You're going to hurt like hell for the next few days as everything warms up, but I think you'll keep your toes. Your fingers, too." He was right about the pain. As the fire continued to heat the room and her body temperature slowly climbed back toward normal, Willa felt like her hands and feet were being stabbed with thousands of tiny needles. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, but tears leaked from the corners of her eyes anyway. Finn saw them and his expression softened. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, "but pain means the tissue is still alive. That's a good thing, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." He brought her more broth and made her drink it all, then brought bread that she managed to choke down despite having no appetite. He checked her temperature by pressing his hand against her forehead, a gesture so tender and domestic that it made something ache in Willa's chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're still too cool," he said, "but you're warming up. That's what matters." Outside, the storm continued to rage, the wind howling around the eaves of the house like a living thing bent on destruction. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and slowly, gradually, the cold released its grip on Willa's body. Exhaustion crashed over her in waves, and despite her best efforts to stay awake, her eyes kept drifting closed. "Sleep," Finn said. "You need rest. I'll keep the fire going and keep watch." "Where will you sleep?" Willa asked, the words slurring together as unconsciousness pulled at her. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "I've slept in worse conditions than a chair by a warm fire. Rest now." Willa wanted to protest, but her body had other ideas. She was asleep before she could form another word, wrapped in blankets by a stranger's fire, warmer and safer than she had been in days. She woke several times during the night, each time to find Finn exactly where he had been, sitting in the other chair with his eyes open and alert, watching the fire and watching her. Once, she woke to find him replacing her blankets, which had slipped during her restless sleep. Another time, he was adding wood to the fire, his movements quiet and careful. Each time, he noticed when her eyes opened and gave her a small, reassuring smile before she drifted off again. When she finally woke fully, gray light was filtering through the windows, and the howling of the wind had diminished to a low moan. The storm was not over, but it had lost some of its fury. Finn was still in his chair, and he looked up when he heard her stirring. "How do you feel?" he asked. Willa took stock. Her hands and feet still hurt, a deep throbbing ache that pulsed with her heartbeat. She was sore all over, her muscles protesting after days of cold and stillness. But she was alive and warm, and that seemed like a miracle. "Better," she said. "I'm alive." "That you are," Finn agreed, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "Think you can eat something more substantial? I have eggs and bacon." The mention of food made Willa's stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. "Yes, please." Finn stood and stretched, and Willa heard his joints pop. He had sat watch over her all night, and it showed in the stiffness of his movements. Guilt washed over her. "You should have slept," she said. "Someone needed to keep watch," he replied simply. "Make sure you didn't take a turn for the worse in the night. Besides, I've gone without sleep before. I'll catch up once I'm sure you're stable." He moved to the kitchen area, which was really just one end of the main room, separated from the living space by a heavy wooden table. Willa watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. He clearly lived alone and was used to caring for himself. Within minutes, the smell of frying bacon filled the air, making her mouth water. "Can you walk?" Finn asked without turning around. "Or do you need me to bring you a plate?" Willa unwrapped herself from the blankets and tried to stand. Her legs shook and her feet screamed in protest, but she managed to stay upright. She took a tentative step, then another, holding on to the chair for support. By the time she made it to the table, she was breathing hard, but she had done it under her own power. Finn glanced over and nodded approvingly. "Good. The more you move, the faster your body will recover. Just don't overdo it." He set a plate in front of her piled high with eggs and bacon and a thick slice of bread, and Willa fell on it like a starving woman, which she supposed she was. The food was simple but perfectly cooked, and she ate until her stomach hurt, then forced down a few more bites because she did not know when her next meal might come. Finn ate his own breakfast standing up, leaning against the counter and watching her with an expression she could not quite read. When she finally pushed her plate away, too full to manage another bite, he spoke. "The storm should break by tomorrow," he said. "Once it does, I'll ride into Enid and ask about your father and brother. Someone might have seen them or know where they hold up. What if they are dead?" Willa asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since they failed to return. "Then we'll deal with that when we know for certain," Finn replied. "No sense borrowing trouble before it arrives. For now, you need to focus on getting your strength back." It was practical advice, and Willa knew it was sound, but the not knowing was its own special kind of torture. Still, there was nothing to be done about it until the storm passed, so she nodded and tried to push the worry to the back of her mind. The rest of that day passed in a strange sort of domestic quiet. Finn did chores around the house, tending to things that needed attention, while Willa dozed in the chair by the fire, too weak to do much else. Every few hours, he made her eat something and drink water, watching to make sure she actually did it. He checked her hands and feet regularly, monitoring for any sign of worsening frostbite, but the damage seemed to be superficial. Painful, but not permanent. As the day wore on, Willa found herself watching Finn when he thought she was asleep. He moved with an easy confidence, comfortable in his space and in his skin. There was a quietness to him, a sense of being complete unto himself that spoke of someone who had spent a lot of time alone. But there was also a gentleness in the way he tended to things, a care in his movements that suggested a kind heart beneath the rough exterior. That night, he made venison stew that was rich and hearty, full of vegetables he must have stored from the previous harvest. They ate together at the table, and for the first time, Willa felt strong enough to really talk. "Why were you out checking fences in a blizzard?" she asked. Finn shrugged. "Cattle can get through a broken fence and wander off. In weather like this, that's a death sentence. Better to check and make repairs when possible than lose stock. You could have died." "Could have," he agreed, "but I didn't, and I found you instead." "Why did you help me?" Willa asked. "You don't know me, I could be anyone." Finn looked at her, really looked at her, and his dark eyes were serious. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because no one deserves to die alone and cold in a broken wagon. Because I could help, so I did. Is there supposed to be more reason than that?" There was a simplicity to his morality that Willa found both refreshing and slightly overwhelming. In her experience, people usually wanted something in return for their kindness, but Finn seemed to expect nothing from her beyond her continued survival. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know I already said it, but thank you. You saved my life." "You're welcome," Finn replied. "And you don't need to keep thanking me. I'm just glad I found you in time." That night, Finn insisted she take his bed while he slept on the floor by the fire. Willa protested, but he was immovable on the subject. "You need proper rest in a proper bed," he said firmly. "I'll be fine on the floor. I've slept on the ground often enough. This is downright luxurious by comparison." Too tired to argue further, Willa gave in and let him show her to the small bedroom off the main room. The bed was simple but comfortable, the blankets thick and warm. She was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow, and she did not wake until morning light was streaming through the window. The storm had finally broken. Willa could tell the moment she opened her eyes, because the constant howling of wind had been replaced by an almost eerie silence. She got out of bed, moving more easily than she had the day before, and made her way to the main room. Finn was already up, standing by the window and looking out at a world transformed by snow. "It's over," he said without turning around. "The storm is done. I'm going to saddle up and ride into Enid, see what I can learn about your family." Fear and hope warred in Willa's chest. "I want to come with you." Finn turned to look at her, his expression doubtful. "You're still recovering. It's a hard ride, especially in snow this deep." "They're my family," Willa said. "Please, I need to know." Something in her voice or her face must have convinced him, because after a long moment he nodded. "All right. But we bundle you up warm, and if you start to feel faint or sick, you tell me immediately." "Understood." "Understood," Willa agreed. Finn found clothes for her to wear, clothes that had belonged to his mother before she passed. They were old-fashioned and slightly musty, but they were warm and dry, and that was what mattered. He layered her in wool and flannel until she could barely move, then wrapped her in his heavy coat again. The ride to Enid was hard and cold, just as Finn had warned. The snow was deep enough that the horses had to work for every step, and the journey that normally took an hour took 3. But the sun was shining, brilliant and blinding on the white landscape, and after days of being trapped in gray gloom, Willa found the light almost painful in its beauty. Enid was larger than she had expected, a growing town with a main street lined with buildings and several side streets branching off. Even in the aftermath of the blizzard, there were people out, shoveling walks and checking on neighbors. Finn steered his horse toward the sheriff's office, a squat building near the center of town. Inside, a man with a star pinned to his vest looked up from a desk covered in papers. He was older, perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines of worry etched deep around his eyes. "Finn Garrett," the sheriff said, standing up. "Glad to see you made it through the storm all right. What brings you to town? "Looking for information, Sheriff Dixon," Finn replied. "This is Willa Preston." Her father and brother left her at their broken wagon about 6 miles west of my place 4 days ago, said they were going for help. They never came back. We're hoping you might have heard something. Sheriff Dixon's expression grew somber. "Preston, you said. What are their names?" "Robert Preston is my father," Willa said, and her voice shook despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "My brother is James. They were on their way to claim land here." The sheriff pulled out a ledger and flipped through it, running his finger down lists of names. He stopped on one page and his shoulders sagged. "Miss Preston," he said gently, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but your father and brother didn't make it. They were found 2 days ago about a mile outside of town. Looks like they got disoriented in the storm and took shelter under an outcropping. They must have fallen asleep. The cold took them. I'm truly sorry." The words hit Willa like a physical blow. She had known, on some level, that this was the most likely outcome. 4 days in a blizzard was too long. But knowing and hearing it confirmed were two entirely different things. Her legs went weak, and if Finn had not been standing right behind her, she would have fallen. He caught her, his hands steady on her arms, holding her up when she could not hold herself. "Where are they?" She managed to ask through the roaring in her ears. "At the undertaker's," Sheriff Dixon said. "I can take you there if you want to see them." Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. She needed to see them, needed to say goodbye properly, even though the thought of it made her want to scream or vomit or both. The undertaker's establishment was a grim place that smelled of chemicals and death. But the undertaker himself was a kind man who spoke in soft tones and led Willa to a back room where 2 bodies lay covered with white sheets. He pulled back the sheets carefully, and Willa looked down at the faces of her father and brother, peaceful in death, as if they were merely sleeping. Tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down her face as the reality of her loss crashed over her in waves. She was alone now, truly alone. Her mother was dead, and now her father and brother too. She had no other family, no siblings, no aunts or uncles or cousins that she knew of. She was 23 years old and utterly alone in the world. A hand touched her shoulder, warm and solid, and she turned to find Finn standing beside her. He did not say anything, did not offer empty platitudes about God's plan or better places. He just stood there, a quiet presence that somehow made the grief a little more bearable. "I'll make arrangements," the undertaker said quietly. "For burial once the ground thaws enough. In the meantime, they'll be kept here." Willa nodded, unable to speak. Finn guided her out of the undertaker's shop and back into the cold, bright day. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, feeling unmoored and lost, with no idea what to do next. "Come on," Finn said gently. "Let's get you back to the ranch. You need time to process this." "I have nowhere to go," Willa said, and her voice sounded hollow and strange to her own ears. "No family, no home. The land claim was in my father's name. I have nothing." "You have somewhere to go," Finn said firmly. "You're coming back to my ranch, and you're going to stay there until you figure out what comes next. I'm not leaving you alone to fend for yourself, not after everything you've been through." "I can't impose on you like that," Willa protested weakly. "It's not an imposition," Finn replied. "It's what any decent person would do. Now come on, before you freeze to death standing here." The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur. Willa was aware of the horse beneath her, of Finn's solid presence at her back, but her mind was far away, lost in memories of her father's laugh and her brother's teasing smile. By the time they reached the ranch, she was shivering again, though whether from cold or shock she could not say. Finn helped her down from the horse and led her inside, settling her in the chair by the fire before going to tend to the animals. When he came back, he made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and pressed a cup into her hands. "Drink," he commanded, and Willa obeyed automatically. The coffee was bitter and hot, and it cut through some of the fog in her head. She sat there, cup cradled in her hands, and stared into the fire while Finn moved around the house, doing small tasks that needed doing. He did not try to make her talk, did not hover or fuss. He simply let her be, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. As the day wore on, the shock began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary sadness. Willa cried, and Finn brought her handkerchiefs without comment. She stared at nothing for long stretches, and Finn left her alone with her grief. When evening came, he made soup and insisted she eat, and though she had no appetite, she forced down enough to satisfy him. That night, she lay in Finn's bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet sounds of him settling down by the fire. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion claimed her, dragging her down into restless dreams full of snow and cold and voices calling her name that she could never quite reach. The next few days passed in a similar fashion. Willa grieved, and Finn gave her space to do so while making sure she ate and rested and did not slip back into the dangerous cold of those first days. He was patient and kind and asked for nothing in return, and slowly, very slowly, Willa began to feel like a person again instead of just a hollow shell of grief. A week after they had gone to Enid, Willa woke to find herself thinking about the future for the first time since learning of her family's deaths. She got up and dressed in the borrowed clothes that were becoming familiar and went out to the main room to find Finn making breakfast. "I need to find work," she said without preamble. "I can't stay here indefinitely, living off your charity." Finn looked up from the stove, his expression unreadable. "You're not a burden if that's what you're worried about. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's kind of you," Willa said, "but I need to do something. I can't just sit here drowning in grief. I'll go mad." Finn was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I could use help around the ranch if you're interested. It's hard work, and I can't pay much, but I can offer room and board and a small wage. It would give you time to figure out your next move without having to worry about immediate survival." It was a generous offer, far more generous than Willa deserved from a man who was essentially a stranger. But she found herself nodding before she could second-guess the decision. "I'll work hard," she promised. "I'm not afraid of labor." "I don't doubt it," Finn said. "Anyone who survived what you went through has steel in their spine. We'll start you off easy, let you build your strength back up. By spring, you'll be ready for the harder tasks." And so Willa found herself becoming a ranch hand, learning the rhythms and routines of frontier life. Finn was a patient teacher, showing her how to care for the livestock, how to mend fences, how to do the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. She learned to milk cows and collect eggs, to muck out stalls and haul water, to chop wood and stack hay. Her hands, soft from a life that had not required hard physical labor, became calloused and strong. Her body, weakened by her ordeal, grew lean and tough. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Willa found her grief settling into something she could carry without being crushed beneath its weight. She would never stop missing her family, never stop wishing things had turned out differently. But she was alive, and there seemed to be a responsibility in that, a duty to make something of the life she had been given when so many others had been taken. She also found herself becoming increasingly aware of Finn in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. She noticed the way his shoulders moved when he lifted heavy loads, the quiet competence of his hands as he worked. She noticed his small kindnesses, the way he always made sure she had enough to eat, the way he checked on her after difficult days. She noticed his rare smiles, and the way they transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. She told herself it was just proximity, just the natural result of spending so much time in close quarters with another person. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Somewhere between being saved from certain death and learning to mend fences, she had started to develop feelings for Garrett that went well beyond simple gratitude. The realization terrified her. She was living in his house, working his land, dependent on his generosity for her survival. The power imbalance was impossible to ignore. If she made her feelings known and he did not reciprocate, she would be putting them both in an impossibly awkward position. So she kept her feelings to herself, buried deep, where they could not complicate an already complicated situation. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it warmer weather and the first signs of new growth pushing up through the thawed ground. Finn taught Willa to ride properly, not just sitting on a horse and holding on, but truly riding, moving with the animal as one unit. They rode out together to check on the cattle, which had survived the winter in better shape than expected, and Willa felt a fierce pride in that, as if she had personally contributed to their survival, even though she had only been there for the tail end of the season. One evening in late March, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had become a habit, these quiet moments at the end of the day when the work was done, and they could just exist without purpose or agenda. "I've been thinking," Finn said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about your family's land claim. It might not be entirely lost." Willa turned to look at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Well, the claim was in your father's name, but with him passed, it should transfer to his heir." "That would be you. You'd need to file some paperwork with the land office, prove your identity and your relationship to him. But if you did that, the claim could be yours." Hope flickered in Willa's chest, followed immediately by doubt. "I don't have money to work the land. I don't have equipment or seed or livestock. What would I do with it?" "You could sell it," Finn suggested. "Land claims are valuable. Plenty of people looking to buy. The money would give you options, let you decide what you want your future to look like. Or," he continued, and there was something careful in his voice now, "you could hold on to it. Maybe partner with someone who has the resources to work it. Split the proceeds. Is that something you'd be interested in?" Willa asked, and her heart was beating faster than the casual nature of the conversation warranted. "Maybe," Finn said. "I've been thinking about expanding my operation. Your family's claim borders my land on the western side. It would be a natural addition. But I want you to know that your place here isn't dependent on that. Even if you decide to sell to someone else, or do something entirely different with the land, you're welcome to stay and work for me as long as you want." "Why are you so kind to me?" Willa asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "You've given me everything and asked for nothing in return. I don't understand it." Finn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "When I first came out here, I had nothing. My parents had died, and I'd sold everything we owned to make the journey west. I filed my claim and started building, doing everything myself because I couldn't afford to hire help. It was the loneliest time of my life. I would go days without speaking to another soul, weeks without seeing another person. I understood then how easy it would be to just give up, to let the frontier swallow me whole. Then one day, my horse threw a shoe about 5 miles from town. I was trying to decide if I should risk riding him home and potentially laming him, or if I should walk and leave him tethered in the middle of nowhere. A man came along, fellow named Henry, must have been 60 if he was a day. He took one look at my situation, pulled out his tools and reshoed my horse right there on the side of the trail. Wouldn't take a penny for it, just said that's what neighbors do. I never forgot that kindness. It seems like a small thing, maybe, but it meant the world to me at that moment. Made me feel less alone. So when I saw your wagon, saw you half frozen and hours from death, I remembered Henry and I thought, this is how I pay that forward. This is how I honor the kindness that was shown to me. Willa felt tears prickling at her eyes. I think Henry would be proud of you. I hope so, Finn said. He died the following winter, pneumonia, but I still think about him, about that day he helped me. And I hope that maybe someday you'll pass along the kindness I've shown you to someone else who needs it. I will, Willa promised. Though I don't know how I'll ever repay what you've given me. You don't need to repay it, Finn said. That's not how kindness works. You just accept it and let it make you better and give it to someone else when you have the chance. They sat in silence after that, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Willa thought about land claims and futures and the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this place, to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a girl from Missouri with dreams of adventure and a future she thought was mapped out. Now she was a woman who had looked death in the face and survived, who had lost everything and found something new and unexpected in its place. She was also a woman in love, though she still had not worked up the courage to admit it out loud. As if reading her thoughts, Finn spoke again. I'm glad I found you that day, Willa. Not just because I'm glad I could help, though I am, but because having you here has been good. The house feels less empty, the work feels less lonely. You've made this place better just by being in it. Willa's breath caught in her throat. Finn, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, his expression open and patient. I'm listening. I have feelings for you, Willa said, the words tumbling out in a rush before her nerve could fail. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and probably inappropriate given everything you've done for me, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. If it makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to leave, I'll understand. But I needed to tell you the truth. For a long moment, Finn just looked at her, and Willa could not read his expression in the gathering dark. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Willa Preston, he said, I have been half in love with you since the moment you opened your eyes in that wagon, and I saw that you were still fighting, still holding on. I didn't say anything because I didn't want you to feel obligated, didn't want you to think I had expectations just because I helped you. But if you're telling me that you feel the same way I do, then I'm the happiest man in Oklahoma territory right now. Joy bubbled up in Willa's chest, bright and effervescent. You love me. I do, Finn said simply. I know it's fast, I know we've only known each other a few months, but out here life moves at a different pace. When you find something good, you hold on to it. And you, Willa, are something very good indeed. He reached out and took her hand, and Willa felt the now familiar calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. She laced her fingers through his and he squeezed back. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Finn said, we take things one day at a time. We work the ranch, we file your claim, we figure out the details of combining our lands. And when enough time has passed that we're sure this is what we both want, we get married and build a life together. That sounds perfect, Willa said, and meant it with her whole heart. Finn stood up and pulled her to her feet, and then, there on the porch under the stars, he kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and chaste, but it held the promise of more to come. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Come on, Finn said. It's getting cold. Let's go inside. They went into the house hand in hand, and Willa thought that despite everything she had lost, despite all the pain and grief and fear, she had somehow ended up exactly where she was meant to be. The following weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness. Willa and Finn worked together during the day, their partnership now deepened by the acknowledgement of their feelings. They sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and hopes and dreams. And sometimes, when the mood struck, they would steal kisses in the barn or by the creek, sweet and heated by turns, exploring this new dimension of their relationship. In early April, they rode to Enid together to file the paperwork for Willa's land claim. Sheriff Dixon helped them navigate the bureaucracy, and within a few days, the claim was officially transferred to Willa's name. Standing in the land office with the deed in her hand, Willa felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere ownership. This was her father's legacy and her brother's, and she would honor their memory by making something of it. True to his word, Finn proposed a partnership. He would provide the resources needed to work both properties, the livestock and equipment and seed. They would split any profits equally until they were married, at which point everything would be jointly owned anyway. It was a fair arrangement, more than fair, and Willa agreed readily. As spring turned to summer, they worked side by side, planting crops and tending livestock and making improvements to both properties. It was hard, back-breaking work, but Willa had never been happier. She was building something, creating a future with her own two hands. And she was doing it with a man she loved, a man who treated her as an equal partner in all things. On a warm evening in late June, Finn surprised her by taking her on a ride out to the creek that ran through his property. He had packed a basket with bread and cheese and cold chicken, and they had a picnic dinner on the bank while the sun set and the crickets began their evening song. "Willa," Finn said when they had finished eating, "I know I said we should wait, make sure we were both certain about this. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, and Willa loved it immediately. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Finn slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Willa felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. They were married in August, in a simple ceremony at the church in Enid. Sheriff Dixon stood up as a witness, along with the pastor's wife. Willa wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Finn had bought her, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Finn wore his best suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion. They spoke their vows in front of God and witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for all their days, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Finn kissed her with such tenderness that Willa thought she might melt right there in the church. The wedding night was spent at the ranch, in the house that was now officially theirs together. Finn carried her over the threshold, laughing at her delighted squeals, and set her down gently in the main room. The fire was crackling in the hearth, and candles had been lit, casting warm shadows on the walls. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," Finn said, and the words sent a thrill through Willa. "It's good to be home," she replied. And then there was no more talking for a long while, only the sweet, heated exploration of two people learning each other in the most intimate of ways. Their marriage was a happy one from the start. They worked together during the day and came together at night, building both a life and a love that grew stronger with each passing season. They laughed together and occasionally argued, as any married couple does, but they always found their way back to each other, drawn by the deep and abiding affection that formed the foundation of their relationship. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly at first, A missed monthly cycle followed by another, then the unmistakable signs of morning sickness. When she was finally certain, she told Finn over breakfast one morning, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. "I'm going to have a baby," she said, and watched as understanding dawned on his face. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a grin split his face, wide and delighted, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the chickens pecking near the porch. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, careful not to hold her too tightly, and kissed her thoroughly. "We're going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "I'm going to be a father." "And I'm going to be a mother," Willa replied, still slightly stunned by the reality of it despite having had days to adjust to the idea. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, and Finn fussed over her like a mother hen, until she threatened to brain him with a frying pan if he did not give her some space. But his concern came from love, and she could not really be angry about that. So she endured his hovering with as much grace as she could muster. As her belly grew and the baby became more real, more tangible, Willa found herself thinking often about the family she had lost. Her mother would never meet her grandchild. Her father and brother would never hold this baby, never watch it grow. The grief of that was sharp and painful, a reminder that joy and sorrow often exist side by side in life. But there was also joy, pure and uncomplicated. Finn would often place his hand on her belly, feeling for the baby's movements, and the look of wonder on his face never failed to move her. They spent evenings discussing names and making plans for the future, dreaming aloud about the life their child would have. In December, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Willa went into labor. Finn rode hard to Enid to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Harris, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. She arrived in time to help Willa through the worst of the labor, coaching her through the contractions and offering reassurance when the pain seemed unbearable. Finn stayed by Willa's side the entire time, holding her hand and letting her squeeze hard enough to leave bruises. He wiped the sweat from her forehead and told her she was strong, she could do this, just a little longer. After 18 hours of labor, their son was born just as dawn was breaking. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, healthy and strong. Mrs. Harris cleaned him up and wrapped him in blankets, then placed him in Willa's arms. "You have a fine boy," she said, smiling. "Congratulations." Willa looked down at her son, this tiny person she and Finn had created, and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it almost frightened her. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the unfocused blue of newborns. His tiny fist waved in the air, and when she offered him her finger, he grasped it with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Finn sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Willa, looking down at their son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Robert James after Willa's father and brother. It felt right, felt like a way to honor the men who had brought her west even though they had not lived to see what came of that journey. Finn agreed without hesitation, understanding the importance of the gesture. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Robert was a good baby, relatively easy, but any baby requires constant attention and care. Willa was tired in a way she had never experienced before, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to fully cure. But she was also happier than she had ever been, watching her son grow and change with each passing day. Finn was a wonderful father, patient and gentle with Robert. He would walk the floors at night when the baby fussed, singing old songs in his rough voice until Robert settled. He changed diapers without complaint and helped with feedings, and was generally everything Willa could have asked for in a partner and co-parent. As Robert grew from infant to toddler, he developed a personality that was equal parts his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength. He was curious about everything, always exploring, always asking questions. He followed Finn around the ranch like a tiny shadow, wanting to help with every task even when his help was more hindrance than anything. When Robert was 3, Willa became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was still difficult, it seemed slightly easier than the first. Their daughter was born in the summer, a long labor that ended with a squalling, red-faced infant who looked remarkably like Willa. They named her Clara May, and she was the apple of her father's eye from the moment she drew breath. Where Robert was serious and thoughtful, Clara was all mischief and laughter. She learned to walk early and was into everything, keeping Willa constantly on her toes. The years passed in the way years do when life is full and busy. Robert grew tall and strong, learning the ways of the ranch from his father. Clara grew beautiful and spirited, with a stubborn streak a mile wide that Willa recognized from her own younger days. 2 more children followed. Another boy named Henry after the man who had shown Finn kindness all those years ago, and finally another girl, Elizabeth, born when Willa was 32 and certain she was done having children. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. They expanded gradually, buying additional land when it became available, increasing their herds, improving their buildings. It was never easy work, but it was good work and they did it together, partners in all things. Willa sometimes thought about that day in the wagon, when she had been certain she was going to die. She thought about how Finn had appeared out of the blizzard like something from a dream, solid and real, and determined to save her. She thought about how he had said, "I've come to take you home," and how prophetic those words had turned out to be. Because this was home, this ranch on the Oklahoma frontier with its weathered buildings and rolling pastures. Home was not a place but the people in it, the man she loved and the children they had created together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Finn surprised her with a trip to Enid. They left the children with a neighbor, something they rarely did, and spent the day in town like a courting couple. They had dinner at the restaurant, a luxury they could now afford but rarely indulged in. They walked along the main street, hand in hand, looking in shop windows and talking about everything and nothing. As the sun began to set, Finn led her to the churchyard where her father and brother were buried. Willa had not been there in years, though she thought of them often. The graves were well maintained, the stones still legible. "I wanted you to have a chance to tell them about your life," Finn said quietly. "About what you've built, about our family. I thought they would want to know." Willa knelt by the graves, tears streaming down her face, and she told her father and brother everything. She told them about the ranch, about her marriage to Finn, about their 4 children. She told them about the life she had made from the ashes of their failed journey, how their sacrifice had not been in vain. She told them she loved them and missed them and thought of them often. When she was done, Finn helped her to her feet and held her while she cried. Then they walked back to the wagon hand in hand, and the drive home was peaceful and quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, lying in bed with Finn's arms around her, Willa reflected on how strange life was, how full of unexpected turns. She had come west seeking adventure and had found tragedy instead. But from that tragedy had come something beautiful, a life and love she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, his voice drowsy. "How lucky I am," Willa replied. "How grateful I am that you rode out to check those fences that day." "I'm the lucky one," Finn said, Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you," Willa said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Finn replied. "Always have, always will." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up any life well lived. Robert grew up and married a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Sarah who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They had children of their own, making Willa and Finn grandparents and bringing new life and laughter to the ranch. Clara proved to have a gift with horses and became known throughout the territory for her training skills. She married later than her brother, choosing a man who shared her passion for the animals and who was willing to make his home on the ranch rather than taking her away. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, steady and reliable, taking on more and more of the ranch's operation as Finn grew older. Elizabeth, the youngest, surprised them all by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Enid that served the children of farmers and ranchers from miles around. Willa and Finn watched their children grow and flourish with pride and no small amount of wonder. They had built this, created this legacy of love and hard work and determination. And as they grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, they did so with the contentment of people who knew they had lived well and loved deeply. On a spring evening when Willa was 53 and Finn was 56, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked suddenly. "Coming west, I mean, everything that happened." Willa was quiet for a moment, thinking about it seriously. She thought about her mother buried in Missouri. She thought about her father and brother lost to the cold. She thought about the fear and pain and grief she had endured. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. I wish my family had survived, wish they could have seen what came from their dream, but I don't regret the journey because it brought me here. It brought me to you. And I would go through it all again if I knew it would end with us." Finn took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, Willa Garrett, and I thank God every day that I found you in that wagon. And I thank God every day that you said I've come to take you home," Willa replied. "Because you did take me home, Finn. You gave me a home and a family and a life I never could have imagined. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, their hands clasped, their hearts full. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and activity, the legacy of their love made manifest in buildings and fences and the laughter of their grandchildren. Willa thought about the girl she had been, frozen and alone on the frontier, certain she was going to die. She thought about the man who had ridden up through the blizzard and changed everything. She thought about the 23-year-old woman who had lost everything and the 53-year-old woman who had gained so much more in return. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of twists and turns no one could foresee. But if you were very lucky, if you held on through the hard times and kept your heart open to possibility, sometimes those twists and turns led you exactly where you needed to be. Sometimes they led you home, to a love that would last a lifetime and beyond, to a place where you could build something meaningful and true. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa leaned her head on Finn's shoulder and smiled. She was home, truly home, and she always would be. The frontier had tested her, had taken much from her, but it had also given her everything that mattered. It had given her Finn and their children and this life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. And that Willa thought, was more than enough. That was everything. The seasons continued their endless cycle, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and fall back to winter again. Willa and Finn grew older, their steps slower but their love as strong as ever. They watched their grandchildren grow, watched some of them marry and have children of their own, making them great-grandparents and adding another generation to the family tree they had planted all those years ago. On a winter morning when Willa was 68 years old, she woke before dawn and slipped out of bed carefully so as not to wake Finn. She wrapped herself in a shawl and went to stand by the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. It had snowed during the night, a gentle snow that had transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland. She thought about another snowstorm, decades ago, that had changed her life forever. She thought about how close she had come to dying, how easily her story could have ended in that broken wagon. But it had not ended there. Instead, it had been just the beginning, the first chapter in a story that had stretched across decades and encompassed more joy than she had ever thought possible. "What are you doing up so early?" Finn's voice came from behind her, rough with sleep. "Just thinking," Willa said, turning to smile at him. Even after all these years, the sight of him still made her heart flutter. His hair was white now, his face lined with age, but his eyes were the same warm brown they had always been, and they still looked at her with the same love they had held since that day he pulled her from the wagon. "Thinking about what?" Finn asked, coming to stand beside her and putting his arm around her waist. "About how grateful I am," Willa said. "About how blessed we have been. About how I would not change a single moment of our life together, not one." "Not even the hard parts?" Finn asked with a slight smile. "Not even those," Willa confirmed. "The hard parts made the good parts sweeter. They taught us what we were capable of, what we could endure together. They made us stronger." Finn pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Willa. I have loved you since the moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Willa replied, "always and forever." They stood together at the window, watching as dawn broke over the ranch, painting the snow pink and gold. It was a new day, another gift, another chance to love and be loved. And Willa intended to make the most of every single moment. The rest of that winter passed peacefully, and spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. Willa and Finn celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of their family. The house was full of noise and laughter, of children running and adults catching up, and memories being shared. It was chaotic and wonderful, and Willa could not remember ever being happier. As the party wound down and the last of the guests departed, Willa and Finn stood on the porch, waving goodbye to their children and grandchildren. When everyone was gone and the ranch was quiet again, they went inside and sat by the fire, exhausted but content. 40 years, Finn said, shaking his head in wonder. "Where did the time go?" "Into living," Willa replied. "Into building this life, raising our family, making this ranch into something we could be proud of. The time went exactly where it should have." "No regrets?" Finn asked. "Not a single one," Willa said firmly. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," Finn said. "That we did not have even more years together." "We have had enough," Willa said. "We have had more than most people get in a lifetime. We have been blessed beyond measure." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the kind of silence that only comes from decades of knowing someone so well that words become almost unnecessary. The fire crackled and popped, and outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and Willa felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had been saved for, she realized. Not just to survive that blizzard, but to live this life. to love Finn and be loved by him, to raise their children and watch them grow and thrive, to build something lasting and meaningful on this Oklahoma frontier. She had been given a second chance at life that day when Finn rode up through the snow, and she had made the most of it. She had squeezed every drop of joy and love and meaning from the years she had been given, and she was grateful for all of it, every moment, every memory, every breath. Years continued to accumulate like layers of snow, each one adding to the depth and richness of their shared history. Willa and Finn aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and spirits remaining sharp and engaged. They continued to be active in the ranch's operation, though more and more of the actual work fell to their children and grandchildren. They were content to serve as advisors and elders, sharing the wisdom accumulated over decades of frontier living. When Willa was 73, she fell ill with pneumonia. It was winter, and the cold settled into her lungs and would not let go. For days, she burned with fever while Finn sat by her bedside, holding her hand and willing her to fight, to survive as she had survived before. Their children came, gathering at the ranch in quiet vigil, afraid that this might be the end. But Willa was not ready to go yet. She fought her way back from the edge of death once more, slowly regaining her strength as winter gave way to spring. When she was finally well enough to sit up and take notice of the world again, she found Finn sitting in a chair beside her bed, his face haggard with worry and lack of sleep. "You scared me," he said simply. "I thought I was going to lose you." "Not yet," Willa replied, her voice weak but determined. "I am not done with you yet, Finn Garrett. You are stuck with me for a while longer." Relief flooded his face, and he took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Good," he said, "because I am not ready to say goodbye." Willa recovered slowly but surely, and by summer she was back to her old self, moving a bit slower perhaps, but no less vital. She and Finn resumed their evening routine of sitting on the porch and watching the sunset, grateful for each day they were given, each moment they had together. On a warm evening in late August, when the air was full of the sounds of summer and the sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, Finn turned to Willa and said, "Do you remember the day I found you?" "Every detail," Willa replied. "How could I forget? It was the day my life truly began." "I think about it often," Finn said. "About how easily I could have missed you, could have checked a different section of fence, could have been just an hour later. All the tiny chances and coincidences that had to align perfectly for us to find each other." "Fate," Willa said simply. "It was meant to be. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together." "Do you believe that?" Finn asked. "In fate, in things being meant to be?" "I do," Willa said. "How else can I explain surviving what should have killed me? How else can I explain you appearing at exactly the right moment? Yes, I believe it was fate. I believe we were always meant to be together, and nothing, not even death, could keep us apart." Finn was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I love you, Willa, more than I have ever loved anything or anyone. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day for the blizzard that brought us together." "And I love you," Willa replied. "You saved my life, Finn, not just that day in the wagon, but every day since. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, keep living, keep believing in the possibility of happiness. You gave me everything." They held hands as the sun set, two people who had weathered every storm life had thrown at them and emerged stronger for it. Around them, the ranch hummed with the life they had created, a testament to the power of love and determination, and the sheer stubborn refusal to give up even when all seemed lost. As twilight deepened into night and the first stars appeared, Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the girl who had left Missouri seeking adventure, about the woman who had nearly died in the snow, about the wife and mother and grandmother she had become. She thought about all the moments, big and small, that had made up her life, and she was grateful for every single one, because in the end, it was not the grand gestures or dramatic moments that mattered most. It was these quiet evenings on the porch with the person you loved. It was the accumulation of days and years spent building something meaningful together. It was the simple, profound joy of being known and loved completely by another person. Willa leaned her head on Finn's shoulder and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the evening, the crickets and the wind and the distant lowing of cattle. This was home. This was where she belonged. And no matter what came next, no matter how many days or years she had left, she would face it all with Finn by her side, just as she had faced everything else. Because he had come to take her home all those years ago, and home was wherever he was. Home was this ranch, this life, this love that had sustained her through everything. Home was the place where, even after all this time, her heart still beat faster when he walked into a room. Home was the man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. The years passed, as years do, bringing with them the inevitable changes that come with age. Willa and Finn both knew they were in the twilight of their lives, but they faced it with grace and courage, supporting each other as they always had. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, marveling at the continuation of the family they had started all those years ago. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 2 days. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, and an overwhelming sense of love that filled every corner of the house and spilled out onto the land. Willa and Finn sat in the center of it all, holding hands and smiling, two people who had beaten the odds and built something beautiful from almost nothing. As the celebration wound down and Willa sat on the porch watching the sun set one more time, she reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had been her life. She thought about all the things she had survived, all the challenges she had faced and overcome. She thought about the people she had loved and lost, and the people she had found and kept close. Most of all, she thought about Finn, the man who had ridden into her life during a blizzard and changed everything. The man who had looked at a half-frozen stranger and decided she was worth saving. The man who had given her not just life, but a life worth living. Finn came out onto the porch and sat beside her, and they watched the sunset together in the comfortable silence of two people who had shared 5 decades of joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures, ordinary days and extraordinary moments. "Thank you," Willa said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For what?" Finn asked. "For everything," Willa replied. "For saving me that day, for loving me all these years, for building this life with me. For every morning I woke up beside you and every night I fell asleep in your arms, for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. For every moment of this extraordinary, beautiful life we have shared, thank you for all of it." Finn brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "It has been my honor and my privilege," he said. "You have made every day better just by being in it. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Willa said. "Every single moment, hard and easy alike. I would choose this life and I would choose you over and over again." As the sun finally sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear, Willa and Finn sat together on the porch of the ranch they had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured through everything. They had survived blizzards and droughts, illness and injury, loss and grief. They had raised a family and built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And through it all, They had loved each other with a fierce and abiding devotion that had never wavered, never faltered, never failed. They had proven that love could survive anything, could overcome any obstacle, could triumph over even the harshest realities of frontier life. Willa knew that their time together was growing short, that the end of their story was approaching. But she was not afraid. She had lived a full and meaningful life, had loved and been loved in return. When the time came, she would face death as she had faced everything else in her life, with courage and grace, knowing that she had made the most of every moment she had been given. For now, though, she was content to sit on the porch with Finn's hand in hers, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Content to be exactly where she was, with exactly who she was with, living in the perfect moment of now, because in the end, that was all anyone really had. The moment they were in, and the people they chose to share it with. And Willa Preston Garrett had chosen well, all those years ago when she had opened her eyes in a frozen wagon to see a stranger who would become her whole world. She had chosen love, and life, and hope. And those choices had made all the difference.